Hello, my name is Marcus, and today we're going to be creating this. So now we're back here in After Effects, and right now I just have this black text in the middle of the screen doing absolutely nothing. And we're going to start by creating the lightning. So let's go up here into Layer, New, Solid. Let's call this Space Crack, because what else would we call it? And let's precompose this immediately. So Control-Shift-C to precompose. And let's just call it Space Crack, because what else? Come on. All right. So now we're in here in the precomp. So let's go into Effects and Presets, and let's apply a really cool effect called Advanced Lightning. Double click on that bad boy. And I'm just going to press Control-Shift-H to view the GUI. And look at this. I'm just going to place the origin all the way on the left, and I'm going to place the hits or the impacts, so to speak, all the way over to the right. Now let's start playing around with these settings. So first of all, I'm going to play with core setting. I'm going to increase the core size quite a smidge because I want it to be this thick crack in space, so it has to have some heft to it. I'm going to go down into glow settings. I'm just going to eliminate it completely because we're going to apply our own glow later on. And let's go down here. Let's look. You can play around with the forking as well. Maybe you don't want it to fork as often. We're also going to play around with the decay. Something like this, just to get, some not too many cracks in a specific direction, but just some general cracks. And we can go down here into expert settings, and core drain is essential here. We're going to increase it until it's quite obvious that we have a beginning and an end-ish. And you can play around with this. You can take this closer if you want. You can maybe increase the forking strength so it looks more like a crack. So something along these lines. So now we have this basic crack. Actually, I'm also going to tint this a specific color, the core itself. I'm going to make this a nice bright yellow orange, something like this. Give me a little bit more orange so it's not this hefty yellow. And we want this lightning or crack, so to speak, to actually vary every time we duplicate it, right? Because otherwise we just have this static lightning, and that's kind of boring. So I'm gonna hold Alt down and left click on conductivity state, and I'm gonna write time times 1. Whoops, which I apparently can't do. There we go. Time times 1. You actually don't need much because see, it's actually quite volatile. It changes a lot every single frame. So this is looking good. So now we're back here in the main comp, and you can see it's animating for every single frame, and we actually don't want that. So I'm going to right click on the composition on the precomp, go up into time, and go over and freeze frame. See, now it's completely static once again. And this way we can actually modify it ourselves every single time we either duplicate or we can change it with an effect. So if we go over to effects and write slider, double click on that bad boy. I'm going to rename this to number. I just pressed enter and then rename it to number. Now I'm going to apply a cute little expression on this time remap thing here. So I'll click on time remap. Let's start by writing seedRandom. Whoopsie daisy. seedRandom 0, true. Now I'm going to explain these in a second. Oh, there we go. Apparently I can't write today. I'm going to explain these in a second. I'm just going to write this first. So R equals random. Where are you? Random. Holy heck, I cannot write today. And there we go. Now R plus, and now we just pick whip all the way up to this number effect here. So that's quite easy peasy. So the first part of this expression is seedRandom, and that's to determine the seed of randomness for this particular expression, which is basically just the instance of randomness or the number of randomness. So I'm gonna say specifically 0, so it's always they always have the same seed, 0. And I'm gonna make it's asking whether or not you want it to be timeless, and I'm saying yes, I do, because otherwise it would be randomizing for every single frame. We do not want that. We want it to randomize once for this layer. Then we're making a variable, which is R, and you could call this whatever you want. You can call this rambunctious if you want. It doesn't really matter. It's just what you call it. So R equals a little function here called random So I'm asking, please randomize between 0 and 1 and return that value to me. And this is in seconds because this is deriving from whatever value type we're on here, and this counts in seconds. So if this is 1, it's gonna say 1. I can actually quickly show you that. So if I say just 1 down here and click away, it's gonna take 1 second. Now we're adding the random value plus whatever value we have on this effect. So if we duplicate this layer now, you can see it changes shape every single time we duplicate. And if we were not satisfied by the shape that we're making, we can go up here into the number and just change it. And there you go. Now the downside is right now this is only 10 seconds long. So if you go above 10 seconds, it's gonna show you nothing because there is no more information. So you can either be careful that you don't exceed those values, or you can go into the precomp, press Ctrl K to get the composition settings and just set it to something extravagant like 50 seconds. So you also just got to remember to just extend the layer all the way to the end, and there you go. So now we got some base setup here. So let's start by making a control layer that is going to define the animation of all these cracks. So let's go up into layer, new, null object, and I'm going to call this control. There we go. I'm going to start applying some stuff to this bad boy. So first of all, I'm going to apply a simple choker, double click, and then I'm going to apply some glows. There we go, glow. And we can duplicate the glows quite a couple of times, and we're going to change these values in a second anyway. So I'm just going to select all the effects, Control A, and edit, copy with property links, and paste it onto my space crack. There we go. Because we want to be able to control these effects on every single layer. So let's start by playing around with this. So AB colors. I probably should have done this before I duplicated all of them, but c'est la vie, mon chéri. So I'm just gonna play around with this. I'm gonna extend the glows quite a smidge so we get this nice. So we have like a core glow. Here at the beginning, we have a core glow, a slightly softer glow, and a very large glow. And we're going to start color picking the previous values. So the next value is going to be even more saturated, maybe even a little more red. And same with this one, we're going to pick whip the last color, and I'm going to pick whip this color and make it a little bit more red indeed. Something like this, just give it a smidge more. So it's one of the things that makes a glow quite realistic is that it actually hues a bit over time. So even if the core is yellow, you're probably going to reach some nice orange red colors at the end of the glow, at the softest part of the glow. So I'm just going to do something like this. I'm going to play around with the intensity of these, just a smidge, something like this. So we still get these nice corrects. And now see what's cool is with this simple choker, if we increase it, it actually looks like the crack is decreasing. So I'm just going to go into the space crack again, and I'm going to increase the core drain a little bit more, maybe up to 50. I thought it was a little bit too long. It was still a bit too long, but maybe we can modify that later on. So let's start by making these layers 3D. So go down here into toggle switch in modes. I'm going to set this to be a 3D layer. Same with the cheese, actually, the text. So let's start moving these into 3D space. So Control-Shift-H just to show the GUI again, because I want to move the anchor point of this bad boy. So I'm going to go up here into the pan behind tool, or Y. And I'm just going to move this anchor point to the origin of the crack. There you go. Because this now is going to be a lot easier to rotate it around its own axis and stuff like that. So I'm just going to move this behind, maybe start duplicating, Control D, rotating a smidge more. As you can see, it already changed shape when I duplicated it. Same if I duplicate again, it's going to change shape again. So let's just start by these four, just so we can see what we're doing. So now I'm going to go up here into Layer, New, Camera. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, we are now photographers. We're just gonna take the settings as they are. It's and see already now it actually has depth of field, because the last camera I made had depth of field enabled, which is right here under camera options. We're gonna be playing with that as well. But first of all, we're gonna make a new layer and null object, which is gonna be the camera control. It can be easier to control the camera with the null than with the camera itself, because then you can keep the rotation and and what have you on the camera itself without changing the focus or changing the position of the camera. So now we can enable the depth of field again. So see, now we already get these nice blurred out images and what have you. So I already changed the settings, I can see here, so I actually cranked up the aperture a lot, which means that it's a much more narrow focus. So if I move this null, you got to remember to make the null 3D as well. If you move the null in 3D space, let's try to find where the focal point is, and the focal point is around here, it seems, so quite far away. And we wanted to focus on the letters as we are now. So change the focus distance, just hold shift down to move it drastically down, just all the way down until it starts getting sharp, something like this. There we go. So now if we move the camera, you can see it blurs out quite quickly, either getting close or getting far away, and that's what we want, baby. You can maybe like duplicate these 4 cracks again, and let's just rotate them a smidge, something like this. And if we actually move them further back in space, you can see they start to blur. So we can add a lot of depth simply by adding a lot of cracks in different points in space. So that adds a lot to it. I'm going to keyframe the simple choke. I'm going to go all the way to the beginning. I'm just going to increase the choke until the cracks seem quite minute, something like this. So it's just like these subtle cracks in space that slowly emanate and become larger and larger and larger. Look at that gorgeousness. That's what we could also animate the camera real quick if that's what we want. So I'm just going to click position, and I'm going to click all the way at the end. I'm going to click on the position stopwatch so we make a keyframe. I'm just going to move the camera back a lot, something like this, maybe 3000, that's enough. And we can even play around with having things or cracks that we pass by as we get closer. So control duplicate a crack here. Let's just move this quite closer to us. And since the anchor point is in the same place, we can basically duplicate this, maybe rotate it a smidge, something like this. Once again, duplicate, rotate it a smidge. So see, now it looks like a specific point where the crack is emanating from. And you can take 2 of the cracks by just selecting them, holding shift down, and just pick whip them and parent them to one of the cracks. That way, if you rotate that one crack, all the other cracks are rotating and moving. Crack is starting up in the middle of space, and we just pass by it on the way to the bigger cracks, and that's kind of cool. We get that nice depth thing going. So see, if you think the complexity of the lightning is a little bit too much, there's too much volatility or detail in the cracks, you can always go in here and play around with the complexity. See, already now it actually helps a smidge. You can see it. Maybe it looks a little bit more like cracks and less like lightning, so that's also you can play around with. So now let's start animating the text. So let's go down here into the choose text, and let's just Control Shift C to pre-compose. I'm just going to call this bad boy text. There we go. So now I'm just going to duplicate this text, and on the bottom text I'm going to start applying some effects. So first of all, fractal noise. Actually, that's wrong. First of all, simple choke. I'm gonna put this first, there we go. And then we're gonna apply another effect called unmult. And another effect called roughen edges. So there we go. Now we have the basis for this. So first of all, we're gonna just crank up the contrast of this fractal noise. Even the brightness, you can start to see the edges. I'm gonna decrease the simple choker like this so we can start seeing some edge going on here. Just gonna increase the contrast quite a smidge, and maybe even the scale. We need the scale to be like, let's say 300, just have quite large scale. So if we play around with the brightness, it has this very noticeable crack areas, something like this. Now we can play around with the roughen edges. So go down into spiky, because we want it to be quite spiky and look like, cracks. So you can play around with this and maybe play around with the scale a smidge. Maybe even the sharpness. You can increase the sharpness to make it more cracky. And you can even play around. Maybe the scale should be lower instead, something like this. So let's go over to second 8, and we want it to be this full brightness when we reach this point. So I'm going to press U to bring up the keyframes. I'm just going to move a few keyframes back, and I'm just gonna decrease the brightness every time I do it. Something like this. Go, 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 crack, crack, crack. Go, 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 crack, crack, crack. So see, right now it's still doing it smoothly, and I don't want that. So I'm gonna select all these keyframes, right click, and toggle hold keyframe. This means that it will not change value until it reaches the next keyframe. So if you can see here, and crack, and crack, and crack, and crack. So that's pretty awesome. So I'm also gonna put these quite close together. I'm gonna basically double the distance between each keyframe to get that, you know, a really cracking effect, thingamabob, thingamajig. So something like this. Might not be perfect, but it's okay. Clack, 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 clack. So if we go back here into our main comp, you can see it's just sitting there being gorgeous, doing absolutely nothing. But we're also missing it. It's not really blending together. So we're just going to select basically all the layers and set them to add. So see, now they're going to start to just salivate on top of each other, something like this. So the text looks kind of weird, and that's because we do not have it in 3D space. There we go. So see, we wanted to blend in with the rest of these things. So we can even go up here into control and basically copy the glows that we like from here and paste it on the text to get that nice same glow. So let's play around with let's make a new layer, new adjustment layer. And this is going to be a glow. Well, yeah, just glow, just plain glow. So we can apply a new glow to this bad boy here, glow. So we're going to play around with this. We can maybe take it down quite a smidge. This is going to be a nice big soft glow. So A and B colors, let's give it some of the same type of l'orange that the others have. Color pick, maybe a little bit darker l'orange, something like this. Maybe make it really, really wide, and it seems to be taking the highest value first. So I'm gonna rotate the color face 180 so that the most brightest part is gonna glow the brightest color, the outer part is gonna glow the darker color. And we also want we want it to blink and look a little bit, you know, grungy and saturated. So we're gonna add a new glow that blinks and, you know, makes it a little bit more grungy. So duplicate. And I'm gonna alt click on glow intensity. I'm gonna set this to wiggle. That's right, baby, we're gonna wiggle. And then 12, 0 points. Whoops, 0 points. Wow, 0.1. So now it's basically just gonna blink. Maybe this feels quite yellow right now, right? So you can also play around with just some simple color corrections. So let's make a new layer, once again, new adjustment layer. Let's call it CC, not as in a name, but you know, as in color correction. Let's apply a good old-fashioned in-your-face curves. And let's play around with this. Let's just brighten it a bit and just, whoopsie daisy, I'm taking the red value. That's not intentional. I'm gonna take this down a smidge, you know, ooh, look at those saturated colors. Now we're getting this really nice orange-red thingamabob thing going on here, right? So we really get that. So now we're going to start looking at the final effects here. So we actually want to apply effects to this entire thing at once. And you could pre-compose all these layers, but problem is, if you take one of these cracks here, double click E, you can see it's referring to this comp and all these expressions. So if I pre-compose this, it would give me an error on like a lot of expressions. So an alternative to fixing this is right click, reveal composition in project. And you can see I actually got some precomps. Let's put them in the precomp folder. So I'm gonna take this cracks space thing. I'm gonna basically take it into a new precomp. There you go. So now let's start applying the last cool effects to this thing. So let's go up here into layer, new, solid. I'm gonna make it completely black because we're gonna apply a fractal noise to it. And let's call this actually a dust specks. There we go. And let's apply a good old-fashioned whatchamacallit fractal noise. There we go. Let's start cranking up the contrast a lot and the brightness quite low because we want this to be basically very small highlights. So I'm even gonna play around with the size here. I'm gonna decrease the brightness quite a lot. Something, you know, along these here lines. So see, you start to get like just these small highlights all over the place. And now I'm going to apply a good old-fashioned lens blur, camera lens blur. That's right, you guessed it, it's here. And we're going to set it quite high, 25. You can see that it's actually also blurring the edges. We don't want that, so I'm going to click on repeat edge pixels, and then it extends. You can go up into evolution, alt click, and let's just say time times, I don't know, 30. It should be subtle because there's so much other movement going on in the frames or something like this. We can modify this later. And next part of this is that we're going to create a new layer once again. There we go, new solid. We're going to call this a DOF map, as in depth of field map. So we're also going to apply a fractal noise to this bombardier here. Double click. And let's just increase the size, something dramatic. We can decrease the complexity to maybe 3. Yeah, that's okay. Maybe the size more even. Maybe decrease the contrast. So now let's just hide this layer. And the cool thing is with the dust specs, we can now set the blur map layer to be the DOF map and make it look at effects and masks. Because this way, if we go up into DOF map and maybe, you know, you can increase the contrast, increase the brightness a smidge, you can play around with the size. If you play around with the contrast, it's gonna make more, like higher difference between where it is blurred and where it's not blurred. That's kind of pretty darn cool. You can even animate this if you want. So I'll click on evolution, time times, whoopsie daisy, 20. That way it varies over time, which is quite nice. And we can even make like the dust specks like slowly slide down or something, almost like it looks like raindrops. So I'll click on offset turbulence, so we get this expression on. And let's start by making square brackets, as you can see here. So because offset turbulence has 2 dimensions, x and y, we need to create an array. An array is made out of square brackets. So 0, comma, then time times, I don't know, 50. So we're saying don't do anything to x position, horizontal position, and apply time times 50 on the vertical position. My apologies. So now we're going to set these dust specs to add, so that they add on top of our existing comp, because that is, come on, that's just sexy. Now we're going to duplicate our main comp, take it above. We're actually going to alpha matte these dust specs with our composition, because now we can fake as though the glow is actually lighting up these specs. And how would we do that? So let's start by adding a fast blur. Bam-a-lama ding-dong. Something like this. It's getting quite diffuse, so it's hard to see. But now if we add a curves adjustment, where are you, curves? And we set it to alpha, and we crank up the brightness. So now you can see these specs are appearing where there's most highlights. So the closer we get to things that are highlighted, the more visible they become. You can even tint these if you want to make sure that they inherit more of the same glow. So you can tint these dust specks a little bit more orange, something like this, you know, give it that niciness. Now for some nice final touches. As you can see here, the glow is quite saturated, meaning it has a lot of color. And in real life, when something is glowing very bright, it actually starts to lose color in the points where it's brightest, so to speak. So I'm going to duplicate this main comp. I'm going to call it high. I'm going to apply a tint effect. As you can see, it's just black and white now. And I'm also going to apply an image wipe. Double click on that bad boy. So let's put the tint after the image wipe. Actually, it could be after, doesn't matter. So let's start increasing the image wipe until we basically reach the core, something like this. You can even increase the softness because we don't want it to be completely sharp either. So something along these lines. And now we can set it to screen, because when you set things to screen, it doesn't go above 1 in value. If you set it to add, it will keep adding values on top endlessly. So you could even play around with the, you know, making the text more less sharp, you know, more blurry. Right now it's quite graphic compared to everything else in the scene. So you could go into your main comp here and you can maybe add a either a roughen edges again on this effect, just roughen edges, double click, and put it at the very beginning before all the glows. And you can play around with this. Basically, you just roughen it up a bit, just give it a little bit of. If you want to receive an email whenever there are new templates or advanced templates, tools, presets, courses, etc., then I would recommend joining the newsletter. You can find the link in the description. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'm really looking forward to see what you guys can create with these ideas and these effects. So you know what? Have a wonderful day with some cheese.